So I was going to title this message, The Truth About Abortion, as you see that I labeled last week's message, The Truth About Abortion Part 1, and this was going to be the second part. But because of the controversy that this topic has stirred up, I'm just going to throw it out there what the original title for this message was going to be, and that is that abortion is satanic. Because when you boil it down, that is the power behind the abortion industry. The Prince of Darkness himself delights in the shedding of innocent blood and the persecution of vulnerable humans. Now, although the media is quick to call the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade deceptive and unjust and all sorts of nasty things, as they always say about those that they disagree with, the abortion industry is very dark and full of deception. So full of deception that their friends in big tech have made it very difficult to be able to search for certain historic events so that you can properly cite it in messages or papers or books. So what I've decided to do as a result is, instead of going through this really hard task of trying to find just simple citations for things we all know happened, let me just refresh your memories, and you can agree with me as I list these out. As like I said, they're just simply facts. They're things we all remember. So, do you remember when it became known that Barack Obama supported late-term abortions? That was a pretty big deal. Do you remember when the government attempted to force Hobby Lobby to provide insurance plans that would cover abortion pills and abortion services? I think that if you've been around long enough, you probably remember that. Do you remember the Project Veritas videos that exposed Planned Parenthood, where it was discovered that Planned Parenthood was selling aborted baby parts? That should have been a much bigger deal than what it was, but I remember that very distinctly in the news as it was presented with the videos, the audio, everything along with it, proving that they indeed were selling aborted baby parts. Do you remember Kermit Gosnell? An entire movie was made about him. He was the abortion doctor who would induce women to get them to deliver so that he could kill the baby outside of the womb. Do you remember Governor Ralph Northam, who thought that it should be legal to deliver babies and then discuss with the mother whether or not to kill them? Do you remember when One World Trade Center was lit up after New York lifted restrictions on abortion through the Reproductive Health Act? Did you know that in 2020, Guttmacher Institute, which is a pro-abortion institution, reported that 1 in 5 babies were aborted? That's about 930,000 babies. That's nearly 1 million. Did you know that in China, there are 30 million more men than women? Why is that? Well, it's because of their one baby policy that was signed in 1979, where families were only allowed to have one baby. And as a result, the Chinese people determined that it was more profitable to have a son than a daughter, and that resulted in them aborting firstborn daughters. So now there's 30 million more men than what there are women inside of China as a result. And get this, since 1979, since the one baby policy of China, it has resulted in the termination of 400 million babies. That's more babies than what there are people inside of the United States of America. It's appalling to me that anyone who supports abortion would characterize the pro-life movement as dangerous or uncaring. If the abortion industry truly was an altruistic movement that was looking out for the rights of women, they would leave it at that, and they would try to do their best to help out women instead of demonizing their opponents as these just terrible people who want to enslave women. All in all, the pro-life movement is compassionate to cases that are exceptional, that we're it's not clear what the best course of action is. For instance, the question about the 10-year-old girl who was raped in Ohio and was seeking after an abortion. I know that the current administration made a big deal out of it. They exploited it. The media exploited it and said that it's not fair that this girl should have to go to Indiana to have an abortion. And yet, despite the heartbeat bill in Ohio, there are exceptions where this girl could have had the procedure done inside of Ohio despite the law. But you don't hear about that because it's not about telling the truth. It's about a satanic agenda where they want to manipulate you through your emotions and say that it's not fair that abortion has been made illegal because of instances like this. Now, although I do not believe that abortion was the correct answer inside of this case, we do have protections for people who go through those sorts of situations. And yet the federal government, Planned Parenthood, and now many leaders inside of the church will toe the line, carry the narrative, and outright lie to make it look like we need more abortions in the world. Leaders who support abortion have succumbed to satanic influence. Children and babies have been victims of bloodshed throughout history. They have been the victims of sacrificial rituals and genocide. If you turn with me to the book of Exodus, chapter 1, you'll see what I mean. In verse 9, we read, "Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." So this is the king of Egypt talking. Oftentimes we call him Pharaoh. And the king of Egypt was afraid of these babies, right? His fear was totally irrational, as up to this point, the Israelites lived peacefully amongst the Egyptians. So don't miss the racial element inside of this story. Like I said, thus far, the Israelites have lived in peace and posed no legitimate threat to the Egyptian people. But Pharaoh noticed that his population was starting to look a little bit different, a little bit less Egyptian and a little bit more Hebrew. And so he wanted to depress the people, the Hebrew people, by turning them into slaves so that hopefully they would not have enough joy in their lives to want to have babies. Well, it didn't work. The founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, was known for her racism as well. One of her goals was to eliminate the black people from our population. Now, I'm going to give you an edited version of her quote just for the sake that I know some people might be offended by a certain word inside of there, and so I'll leave that out. This is what Margaret Sanger had to say. "We do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the black population." Well, since 1973, 19 million African American babies have been aborted, and 37% of abortions in America are performed on black women. Going back to Exodus, Pharaoh was scared. His plan, slavery, failed. So he tried a new tactic, which culminates in verse 22 of Exodus chapter 21. Pharaoh commanded all his people, "Every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live." Now, do you see the bizarre little parallels in what Pharaoh did and what the abortion industry of today does? Pharaoh killed the boys. China killed the girls. He didn't want the boys growing up to be able to fight against him. And these justifications that are brought up as to whether to kill boys or to kill girls are actually totally inconsequential. Satan wants to kill little children. He wants to kill babies, and he finds justifications in people who will do his bidding to accomplish this goal. Pharaoh was desperate to keep his power. And if money is power, the abortion industry has a lot. Between 2019 and 2020, Planned Parenthood made $1.6 billion. And in 2020, they invested $45 million to elect pro-abortion candidates. And this is pretty remarkable coming from a non-profit organization. Now, what's particularly ominous to me is the Egyptian response to Pharaoh's command. The Bible tells us Pharaoh commanded all his people to throw Hebrews into the Nile. This means the public bought it. They participated in the slaughter of newborn babies without a second thought. Now, would it surprise you if Pharaoh riled his people up and got them into a frenzy? I think it'd be interesting if Pharaoh told his people that their rights were in danger if they did not kill these Hebrew babies. I could see it happening. That he would say that if we allow these Hebrew babies to grow up into men, they could end up taking away your rights. And we do the same thing today. Think of the arguments from abortionists. They say, my body, my choice. They say, you only care about life before it is born. They say, you want to control women's bodies. They say, this is about women's reproductive rights. They say, no uterus, no voice. This is not to mention the obscene protest that feminist organizations staged in 2016. And if you saw your daughter behaving the way that these women were, I imagine you'd be a little bit embarrassed. Now, did you know that Pharaoh, however, Pharaoh himself did not kill a single baby? His hands were clean. Pharaoh didn't kill any babies. His people did. Once again, that is why it is so important for us to be rooted in God's word. We should honor the authorities, but we stand up when they choose to defy God. Before Pharaoh commanded his people to kill the Hebrew babies, 2 women defied the commands of Pharaoh. Let's read that story. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other Puah, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this, and let the male children live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Shiphrah and Puah did not have an elaborate plan to stop Pharaoh. They simply resolved in their hearts to not give in to his orders. We are told that their reasoning was that they feared God, and God blessed them. Now, Pharaoh even confronted them on their failure to fulfill his command, and they made an excuse. Now, I think they stretched the truth a little bit here. They said they couldn't make it in time to see the deliveries, and it's kind of inferred that's not necessarily true. What does this tell us? Because being dishonest, that's a sin. And yet they're dishonest and it said that God blessed them. That tells us that God is pro-life. Now, Pharaoh could have had them killed right on the spot. Not for defiance, but for their failure. But instead, God blessed them and Pharaoh let them go. I wonder how many people today would have done what Pharaoh asked. See, the true pandemic today in the civilized world is cowardice. How many people would say, this is not the hill to die on? How many would resolve to say, we'll fight them with our votes in November? How many people would say things like, well, it's the law of the land, or I'm just doing my job? Let that never be us. May God strengthen us against all of the evil agendas of this world and direct us in how we might combat evil with good and combat violence with love. I'd like to thank you for joining me for today's message. Again, my name is Bill Sang from Faith Presbyterian Church. You can join us on Sunday mornings at 10:30 in the morning. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.